So this is a 2006 MacBook, an entry-level polycarbonate model from the time when Apple made, well, entry-level notebooks. I've said this many times already, but I don't think Apple nowadays has a real dedicated entry-level consumer notebook. Back in the late 2000s, they had three categories of notebooks: MacBook Pro, meant for professionals on the go; MacBook Air, a super slim model but still pretty expensive; and a lower-end consumer model, the MacBook, younger brother of the iBook. And over the years, the MacBook line was quietly discontinued, only to be brought back in that short-lived abomination that wasn't cheap nor really similar in any way to its predecessor. It was supposed to be thin and lightweight, which is weird because that's what the MacBook Air's defining feature was supposed to be. And all the while the MacBook Pro was getting thinner and thinner. And by the time both the MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro got redesigned, I mean, they just kinda look the same to me and have pretty similar specs, to be honest, so I'm sometimes left wondering what's even the point of having those two separate categories. Meanwhile, the MacBooks really did stand out. For one thing, they were plastic, unlike the higher-end models, which made them chunkier and cheaper, but not in a bad way. They were still solidly built and had features that I wish we could still have with modern Apple notebooks. You could very easily upgrade the three things I consider crucial: memory, storage, and the battery. They also had a solid selection of ports, a slot-loading CD-DVD writer, and at the time this was Apple's best-selling laptop of all time, so I was kinda confused as to why they abandoned this concept of having a true entry-level portable, especially considering how aggressively they've been promoting their desktop consumer products, like the Mac Mini. And I'd love to see them offering something similar to what they had almost 20 years ago. Heck, it could still be plastic, just have a better screen and new architecture. And I'm saying that because I'm really fond of these. I really think they have a nice form factor and they're a joy to use and work on, even still today. But no matter what, they're still getting on in years, and they've never unfortunately progressed past the Core 2 Duo architecture. So you might think they'd be pretty useless for anything you'd want to do as far as modern productivity goes, but I found, as with many of computers in my collection, they actually do an admirable job handling many of the tasks you might want to do, and for some things they actually do a better job than a modern MacBook. So I wanted to take you around the process of upgrading one of these guys, installing the OS and the applications I like to run, and just have fun, but also we'll push this thing to its limits by not only editing this video you're watching on it, but also uploading it to YouTube as well, because it's just something I enjoy doing on my channel. It's a fun challenge and a statement that you don't necessarily need top-of-the-line equipment to make content and have a good time. First thing, if I'm going to use this to do any sort of serious work, I'll treat myself to some upgrades. So let's pop out that old slow hard drive and pop in a nice 2.5-inch SATA SSD, which will give us a nice little bump in speed. I love how easy this is to do on these models, with only this metal strip to remove under the battery, and you have access to your storage and memory. Now, I have quite a few models which have the sled missing, a little tray you attach your drive to, and it has a little pull tab on it, but if you don't have that, it's not a big hardship. You can just pry it out and then stick a new one in, and it'll stay there just fine. With memory, this thing takes up to 4 gigs of 667 MHz DDR2 RAM, which I just happen to have. And bam, you just stick it in and that's it. You've just upgraded your computer without having to take it all apart or desolder anything. Nice. Now what's funny is that I have this stack of old SSDs from goodness knows where, and I use them whenever I need a drive for one of my projects. And since I have no idea where they came from, I don't really know what I'll find on them until I test them. So I just stuck this one in my MacBook, and while I was getting ready to boot off of my bootable USB, the damn thing booted into Ubuntu. So yeah, it had a working Linux OS on it, and I guess I could have continued using Ubuntu, but it's not exactly what I had in mind for this project. Instead, I'm going with one of my favorites, which is OS X Snow Leopard, and more precisely 10.6.8. If you'd like, you could install Windows or Linux, sure, but I really like getting back to these older versions of macOS. I don't know why, I just like using them, and for what we're planning to do, it's going to work the best. So I went ahead and I've installed Snow Leopard 10.6, which went without a hitch, and with that SSD it really does go very fast. So in no time at all I was back at the desktop. What I usually do next is I install a cumulative 10.6.8 update, and I also run automatic updates to make sure all the apps are running their most up-to-date version. And for the most part, I have very little issues running these older apps. I mean, if you've been using them as a teen like I have, you're very familiar with them, and I just have a blast playing around with them again. It's like visiting an old friend. And there's usually at least a couple of things that I'll install on top of the fresh installation, and that's of course a web browser, and I like to use Interweb, which still does an awesome job surfing the web, and even more demanding tasks like running YouTube here. I mean, it just does it, even if it's at a lower quality and takes a bit longer. And there is actually a 64-bit build of this browser, which means you can even visit sites like Netflix, but I found those don't really work too well. And while I'm here, I mean, I might as well install some games, am I right? We recently took a look at that upgraded Mac Mini, and I'd say this MacBook is on par with what that computer could do once we've upgraded it, which I mean makes sense given how it's pretty much the same configuration. Much like that machine, this notebook has 64 megs of VRAM with that Intel GMA 950, which is not great, but for some early to mid 2000s gaming classics, I mean, are you freaking kidding me? I mean, this is awesome, and all these games run at 30 FPS or above, and they're all very playable. Well, except for Doom 3, which, I mean, of course. But hey, it does run, and that's something. And GarageBand is something I genuinely think these old guys can still be useful for, and I do use an old MacBook for band practice still, since it just kinda does what I need. I wouldn't really say this is adequate for like professional musicians, but if you didn't feel like setting up an amp and you only had this, I mean, it's pretty useful, and surprisingly works very well with all my newer accessories like this iRig Pro. It pretty much requires no setup. And this is actually my preferred way of just practicing, since I live in an apartment and I have neighbors and I don't really like cranking up my amp, so I just put headphones on and yeah, it works pretty good. And if you'd like, you could also put like Logic Pro or something more professional on here, but I don't really see the need, at least for my purposes. And that iRig Pro is how I actually hook up my microphone, since it takes both a 1/4-inch connector as well as XLR, so I was able to use my MacBook for voiceover in both iMovie and Final Cut Pro. For editing the footage, I had to get it onto my computer, which if you're filming on a newer iPhone like me, can be kinda tricky. Since I've done videos like this before, I know that these old guys can't really handle modern encoding and resolution, so I made sure to film everything in 1080p at 30 FPS with no HDR, and I think that still looks pretty decent if you're not one of those people who can't stand watching anything that's not 4K or 8K. Depending on the OS and the hardware you're running, you might be able to import the videos just using iPhotos, which is what I've actually done for my last video on El Capitan, but for this occasion I wasn't having much luck. The app would just become unresponsive, so I went with a tried and true method, image capture. It's an ancient camera app for macOS, and it's still included in the newest versions as far as I'm aware, and yeah, it just enables you to view any pictures and videos from your digital cameras and phones, including iPhones, and they just pop right up. After that, I could import them into my editing software, which, you know, took a bit of time, but was very manageable once I did import it. I actually wanted to try Final Cut Express since I've never actually used it, so I've tried the 4.0 version, and while it did work, I just didn't like the interface. Editing in iMovie felt pretty smooth, and I didn't really feel like I was struggling or that the software was bogged down. I've also hooked up my external keyboard and mouse just because it's a bit more convenient. I wanted to hook it up to my external monitor, but since I've been moving some stuff back and forth between my apartment and my new house, I must have misplaced my HDMI adapter for these things because of course they use a proprietary freaking adapter, but not the same one as the newer MacBooks. No. Whatever, adapters can suck it. Look, last time I've gotten some comments like, dude, who are you kidding? Look at your video. It's the simplest shit you could put together. Of course it's going to be a breeze editing it all together. What a joke. And I completely agree, my style of editing is pretty amateurish, especially compared to a lot of other modern channels who have all these fancy effects and cuts, and I don't really know how well this machine would have handled all that. Probably not well at all, but some people obviously like simpler, more down-to-earth style videos. And hey, even my dumbass managed to find an audience with these quote-unquote low-effort style videos, so for some it might be just what they need. And I have to say, if you're not doing any fancy editing, I mean, goddamn, even this old crappy MacBook really does the trick. Now, no, I wouldn't want to trade this for the experience I get on my modern computer, since first, it's so much slower, takes a long time to import, render and export those videos, and second, I have a much better time using modern software. But I do enjoy getting back to this older gear, which is something I basically have this channel for, and I like demonstrating how we're oftentimes misled to believe that an old computer is useless junk, and we should upgrade to one that's no older than, I don't know, 3 years. And I remember when I still had that 2017 MacBook Pro, I'd get comments like, "Ugh, are you still using Intel MacBooks? What a joke." And I couldn't figure out what the deal was, since that thing was still doing everything I needed, even though it was at that point 7 years old. And I think the issue is that some people don't really get their computers in accordance with their needs. Rather, they get one because, hey, it's been 3 years, time to get a new computer. And no, I'm not saying you should go back to using 15-year-old computers. Rather, if you do have an older piece of tech and it does the job, does what you need it to do, just keep loving that thing, no matter what people on the internet say. And if all my tech was gone, or God forbid, poo-poo, stolen, or I was stranded with my phone and a 2006 MacBook, I'd still be able to make videos for you guys and not only edit them, but upload them as well. Oh yeah, for this experiment I wanted to see whether it'd be possible to upload the final video on YouTube. And since I was able to watch videos just fine, I didn't think it'd be an issue. However, it could only handle 480p playback. So I was kinda curious whether I'd be able to upload this 1080p footage, and it turns out, yeah, sure, no problem at all. And since you're not playing it back, I reckon you could even go higher with the resolution and file size. And you might naturally be wondering, how in the heck did I manage to insert this footage here? I mean, if it's already all rendered and stuff. Well, I've actually tried this with another video first, just to be sure it would upload correctly, so yeah, that's what you're seeing here. So yeah, this champ did an excellent job, even almost 20 years later, so if you happen to have an older laptop sitting somewhere, I'm sure it would still prove very useful even decades after purchasing. I've said this many times on my channel, the fact that these machines were so upgradable, it made it possible to push that old hardware into a new generation and breathe some new life into it. And yeah, everything you saw in this video, along with editing, that little music montage, recording, voiceover, it was all done right here on this guy. So go out there and make use of those old PCs or Macs you might still have sitting in your closet somewhere. And if you enjoy watching me play with old, outdated hardware, there's plenty of that here on my channel, so you might want to check out some of my other videos, or you might even want to consider subscribing. I do these videos every week, and if you'd like to support what I do, you can do so on Patreon for just $1 a month, or more if you'd like. If you'd like to chat with me and other users, you can join our Discord server. All the links will be in the video description. Thanks, and I'll see you again soon. Cheers.